Hi, this is Wes Hinchus and Galen Doty. We're glad that you chose to be a part of this webinar today. I want to talk about buy-sell planning for partnerships, trusts, and also landlords today.
There's a story about Charles Stanley, and he had a large church in Atlanta, Georgia, and he was dealing with things that just all kinds of difficulties in the church. And, we kind of relate that to a lot of our farm clients we work with because they have troubles on the farm. They've got children that want to be on the farm and some that are on the farm and maybe some don't want anything to do with the farm. So how do we deal with these issues? And you can get to this place where you feel like you're paralyzed. Well, the story with Charles Stanley was he was having troubles with the church. The church secretary comes in and says, Dr. Stanley, there's an elderly lady that would like for you to come over and have lunch with her. And he says, I really don't have time. There's all these troubles. I just can't do it. 2 weeks later, the church secretary walks back in and says, Dr. Stanley, you've got to see this lady. She is wearing us out. She says, you have got to come and have lunch with her. So they set the date. He went, had a great lunch. They got up from the lunch table, and she walks him into her living room where there was a picture. And the picture, she walked him over to, she says, Dr. Stanley, can you tell me, what is that a picture of? He said, well, it looks like Daniel in the lion's den. She says, yes, but what is he doing? Well, he looks like he's praying. She says, yes, but if you look at that, he's looking at the answer. He's not looking at the problems. And of course, the picture with the lions all around him looking very hungry. And that's the way a lot of our farmers feel when they look at the situations on how to do their planning on the farm, how to get the right kids involved in the farm, and how to do it in a way where they don't feel like they're disinheriting other children. Dr. Stanley said that was one of the most influential talks that he had with someone where instead of looking at the problems, looking at the answers. And that's really what AgroLegacy is about, is trying to help people with consulting and thinking through the process of, as Wes just said, the buy-sell situations.
Great story there, Galen. I wanted to tell you that, usually we find that business owners have some typical goals. These agribusiness owners, the farmers, they want to grow their farm operation. They want to make sure that it's growing and thriving. They know that if they're not growing, they're falling behind. And most of the time they want to do that because they want to bring in the next generation behind them. And many times somebody brought them into the business, they want to bring in their kids and grandkids into the operation too. However, the issue is that most of the time that doesn't happen, and the stats are pretty staggering that even though they want to bring in the next generation, that's just not going to happen. So Galen, let's talk a little bit today. So why do successful farm operations not make this happen? Why don't they get it to that next generation?
Well, a lot of times it's because either one of their children or maybe more than one stayed on the farm and did help mom and dad. And then when they realized that they weren't getting anything put together that was solid, that they knew that they would end up with that farm, they decided to take another job, or they left the farm. And sometimes we find where kids do stay on the farm, one or two children do stay on the farm continually, and then at the point that mom and dad pass away, they've got problems there because they didn't do planning, and now they're dealing with siblings that didn't have anything to do with the farm, and they're splitting it up equal. So there's some real hard questions and things that have to be dealt with.
Very good. Sometimes we find that there's a conflict between those kids that want to remain on the farm and those kids that don't want to remain on the farm. Typically, the inactive heirs really want top dollar. They've heard from the coffee shop that, land is bringing they always hear the high dollar amount. They are concerned, the amount that's set might affect their estate taxes and what might need to be paid. And they want paid promptly. They don't want their money in a low return investment for a long period of time. Maybe they have other opportunities that they'd like to pursue. What is it that the active farm heirs want that's kind of a counter to that, Galen?
The funny thing, Wes, is, and you and I hear this all the time, the children will all come in and sit down at the table when mom and dad are there and say, we are never going to sell this farm. We want that farm. And then just very often what happens is they walk in after mom and dad are both gone, and they'll say, we always thought we'd keep the farm, but we've decided to sell it. And obviously, if there's a child that really was actively farming out there, he really does not want to sell it. He wants to keep it. He's thinking he's going to continue to operate the entire farm and rent from his brother and sister and continue to operate that farm. But if they walk in, as you just said, and say, well, we want to sell our parts, they put an awful lot of pressure on him to come up with some cash. And like you say, they don't want to wait long for that money.
Well, there's a change, isn't there? After mom and dad are both gone, maybe mom and dad ask their off-farm child what they thought. But now, since mom and dad are out of the picture, sometimes it's the
changes.
in-law
Yeah.
that has an influence, and now it's their asset, not a mom and dad's asset.
Absolutely right. Yeah. That's absolutely right.
So who are some common folks that ought to succeed, and why are they kind of common on our list here, Galen?
Well, I think the idea that it would be a family member, more likely a son or a daughter that had stayed on the farm. But again, we've had a situation where we had son and two parents that came in, and the son says, "I'm not staying if you all don't put a plan in place." Because I'm not going to fight with my siblings about how I'm going to end up owning the farm. And I don't care how you decide it needs to be done, but I need to know what the rules are. I need to know how this is going to work out. If that doesn't happen, then sometimes we find it's the neighbor that ends up buying the farm. And if it's not the neighbor, it's someone that's moving from up north somewhere, and their land was worth a whole lot more, and they're selling their land up north, and they're buying 2 or 3 acres down a little further south for the same dollars that they had in their land.
It could also be a sibling, though. It could be two brothers or a brother and sister that farm together for a long period of time, and one of them doesn't have heirs, but the other one does. We've got a situation like that currently where there's 3 brothers, and there's only one of them had a child that wanted to be in the farm, and that created some conflicts that they wanted to have resolved, and that certainly can be done to give that farming child, the nephew, the ability to come back and be able to rent it from all three of his dad and his 2 uncles there. So
it's really, though, Wes, and you're right, you laid that out well, but I would say it's generation by generation, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Because we find that in the example you just laid out, that's exactly true. We, brothers that had just one family member, a son or nephew that was going to come back to farm. Well, what if those other children, at the point that their parents are gone, want to sell that land? This is going to be, it could be another disaster. And so each generation really needs to be some serious planning done as to how it's going to keep together, how to keep that thing together. Yep. And if it's not planned for, it won't happen. It just won't happen.
Absolutely. There's some common objectives that we have a lot of farmers that talk about. They said, the reason we're starting planning now is typically they've seen some emergencies happen. Either there's something that happened within their own family or their neighbors, and they're usually concerned about a couple of things. One is, how do we keep the farm in the family? That's primary objective there. And then 2, it's, how do we protect the security of those that are involved? We want to make sure that there's enough income should something happen to dad, or that mom has the income that she needs, but then also we continue this thing on down to sons and daughters who want to be involved in the farm. And that's usually done by establishing a successor in the operation and knowing the rules of how they get in, how they engage, and how they are able to stay on the farm. Taxes are a big issue. Income tax and estate tax. Some of these taxes are things that you've never had to worry about. But we've seen farm values expand so much that there's a lot of value there, and the taxes have always changed and will continue to change in the future. So we need to keep up to date with that to make sure that it's set up in the proper way that you don't get blindsided by some tax.
Absolutely. Just to kind of touch on that a little bit, most of the time when we sit down and talk with farm families and they've got one child that's actively working and operating on the farm with their parents, then a lot of times what happens is we're looking to create a way for that active farm child to absolutely buy the equipment, the livestock, the things that make the operation work. They can pay rent to the other children maybe if they feel like the land is often it's just too much value for them to be able to just have liquidity enough to make up the difference for the land. But maybe the land goes equal to the kids, but that operation really needs to stay with the farming child. And so a lot of times planning we do will involve how can that one child that's remaining on the farm buy the equipment and the livestock.
Absolutely. And the main goal there is to minimize any conflict, create the family harmony, so everybody's able to get together after the parents are gone. Galen, I want to switch gears a little bit, and I want to talk about buy-sell arrangements, types of buy-sells, and some of the things we're talking about today happen to deal with things that can be put inside of trust documents, and it's the rules that allow your kids and grandkids to play by. But on the other side of it, it's current partnerships that you might be in. If you're currently own, part of a C Corp, S Corp partnership or an LLC with somebody else, and how those buy-sells can be structured where it makes tax sense, but also it makes sense for the overall goals of the organization as well.
Well, there's, Wes, there's there's three ways that we find that people try to structure things, for a buy-sell. Sometimes two of them are proactive, and one is reactive. And the proactive things that we lay out in front of people a lot of times, or at least have a discussion with them about, is they can do some pre-planning. They can do a sinking fund and start to set some money aside so that the money is accumulating at a rate that's necessary. Let's say it's a 5 or 10 year plan. They can try to set some money aside and have it sitting there to create some liquidity when it's needed. Secondly, there is life insurance could be put in place, and sometimes life insurance is a perfect fit because it's usually a smaller amount of money that has to be set aside, and the money comes in tax-free and is available right at the time it's needed. It's not until mom and dad are gone, or maybe dad is gone, or maybe both mom and dad's gone, that the money's needed. But when it's needed, it's there. The one that's kind of the hardest one, and the one that most people pick, is the reactive one, and that is we've done nothing. We've done no planning, but you just go borrow the money at the bank, son or daughter, if something happens to us, and now you buy out your siblings. Well, the problem with that is not only do you owe every dollar of that still, but there's interest on top of that now. And so if they couldn't really try to do some proactive thing, how in the world do they expect their child to be able to afford the reactive thing?
Mm-hmm. So, and it could be a combination of all three.
Absolutely.
And really the fourth option is to maybe sell off some property in order to create enough liquidity to keep the rest.
It's not usually the option that our farm families like, because none of them are into selling it, are they?
Yeah. But sometimes they're
necessary.
They're forced to.
That's right.
Sometimes
necessary.
So you talked about the funding options, but let's talk about kind of the structure, the paperwork,
Sure.
all the agreements that might be put in place. One is a cross-purchase method. How would that be put in place?
That would, in most cases where we're just talking about one generation, mom and dad own it, and they have a son that stayed on the farm, and so maybe the son would own some life insurance on dad in particular, that heaven forbid, if something does happen to dad, the son could write a check to his mother and buy the machinery and buy the livestock and continue to operate the farm in the way they've been accustomed to doing it. and it creates some security for mom at that point. At the same time, the other children, the other siblings that are not involved in the farm, look at it that, okay, you know what, our brother, he actually bought it from mom. Mom didn't just give it to him. And so that's all pretty necessary to keep the fighting down, right? So that would be one form of a cross purchase, is where really, to be honest with you, dad might need something on son, because if something happens to the son and he'd already bought some shares of the LLC or is a partner in some of the machinery and livestock, then now we're dealing with a daughter-in-law and maybe grandchildren. We want to make sure that they're covered as well.
And that's a way to, if there had been some purchases or some gifts to those children or grandchildren already, it's a way to get those shares of stock back.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about that. So we got a stock redemption agreement as well that might make some sense, where whereas you might have a sinking fund or some insurance, or at least have the ability to borrow within that entity in order to buy those shares, either from whichever side of that owner would be. That would be where you absolutely have two owners in one entity. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, and that is a little more difficult, because still either you're going to have to go borrow the money with that, or have something in place to create. What you don't get in an entity purchase is a step up in basis. So the basis that you had prior to the death of say dad in this case, whatever his basis was, and maybe he's owned that land or owned that machinery for a long time and has depreciated it all out, well, there's no step up in the basis if the son wants to come along and trade that machinery or do something with it. And so the cross purchase works a little better as far as basis goes, but you can certainly do the entity purchase, and it just doesn't help when it comes to basis, really.
Yeah, and some of this has to do with the type of entity that you already have, whether it's a C corp, an S corp,
absolutely,
LLC, and so that's more of an individual conversation. After that conversation, we'll probably be able to guide and steer somebody to which one is the best plan for what they've already had set up.
Absolutely, or if they absolutely never have any intention of ever selling, or maybe that is not as an important an issue at that point.
And so that leads right into what's the best one for them. It really comes down to the operation form, which owners are involved in it, and what's the age of the owners, and really what's the plan. Is there a plan for retirement for one of them, or is it we'll just own it forever? When will the sale happen? Is that sale likely to happen in a 5 to 10 year time frame, or is this likely to happen way out in the future? And basis does make a big difference. Basis makes a huge difference. With most farmers, they're concerned with basis upon things that have been depreciated out, and maybe like Galen said, the land you may not ever sell, but always you're going to be trading equipment and livestock and things like that. So a step up in basis is an important part of that.
Well, and so you bring up the land, and so we do talk about that when it comes to planning documents, that really it should address that. For example, if a sibling, who is not involved in the farm, says, "Well, I have a third of the farm here, and I've been renting it to my brother who's the farmer, but I think I really want to sell it." That even there's some rules there. We try to talk about, you mentioned earlier, and you're so right, they go to the coffee shop and they hear the highest price that land's sold for in their area, and they come to their brother and say, "Hey, this land is worth X number of dollars." And, the brother who's trying to farm that is going, "Oh, no, it's not worth that much. It's something less than that." So we try to help people think that through a little bit, and let's get an appraised value, and then maybe even some sort of a discount. And again, depending on the person, what discount they felt like was a fair and right way to do that. But
yeah. Absolutely. And so we talk about some different ways to value. That's certainly one way to value. It could be an agreed upon value as well.
It could be.
And so
although we see that is the hardest one because, right, times change and values of land goes up and down a great deal. You and I have been involved in a situation where, a child goes, hey, this is what Dad said the land should sell for, but it's way, way undervalued, and I still want to get along with my brothers and sisters when this is over with. And so, that's not always the best, but some people will actually put a value on land.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. If we look at funding that buy-sell, we talk about how do you fund it? We talk about existing cash flow, and
Right.
that's an issue, I suppose. Is some people say, well, geez, I can't fund it. There is no cash flow there to fund that buy-sell. Let's talk about that a little bit. If there's not cash flow there to fund the buy-sell, what do we do in the future? Or where do we expect the cash flow to come from if we take the reactive options?
Right. And so, Wes, I've heard you say this quite a bit, and I like it because it's so true. When you tell a farmer, look, if you have, and I keep going to 3 children, and it's only worse if you have even more. Because if you have more children and you're dividing the land up, now the operation maybe goes to the farm child, but I want you to think about if you've got 5 kids and you're an heir, you're only getting 20%, and if your siblings all come to you and want to sell their land, you're looking to buy 80% of that land. But let's go back to a smaller amount and say, what if you're trying to buy a third of it, or some chunk that's even smaller than that? Ask a farmer, could he go out and buy that much more land right now today? Yep. Most of our farmers would say, oh, no, I can't afford to do that. Yet they think that their son that has been on the farm with them can do that if their siblings wanted to sell.
When it's actually setting that son up in a financial position where they got the ability to have some cash for down payments and things like that in order to buy them out.
Right.
And you're exactly correct. Is how do you double acres if it's basically 2 children there?
It's funny though, isn't it? Because we hear Dad say, "Oh, they can do this," and yet they wouldn't buy that themselves.
They wouldn't double their own acres next year. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, so a properly drafted buy-sell agreement, it does a couple of things. It reduces risk, right?
It does.
So we
Certainly does.
limit the uncertainty that might be out there.
Even if you, as you said earlier, even if you don't really try to eliminate all the risk, any part of that risk you can eliminate is way worth considering.
And that's all part of a combination and a plan that actually makes sense. Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah. We talk about some advantages. We're establishing a value for estate tax purposes. That is one big issue. Uncle Sam might put a different value on it than we would actually put on that. And for many, we want to keep that value low if you have a nice operation.
Well, that's why appraised value is so important. And we have a lot of our farm clients that will tell us, here's what we think that land's worth, and we know that they're undervaluing it a little bit.
That's right.
But it's really an appraised value that the IRS is going to use when it comes down to land value. It's not just going to be a number put on a page.
Absolutely.
But you're right. It's not just the estate tax. It's also the consideration of coming up with money for another sibling. It's also, what about debt? A lot of times we find that there's some debt issues and some considerations for debt. It can be several different things that we are very concerned about regarding liquidity needs. That buy-sell is the particular one that we're focusing on here today, though.
It looks like we're about out of time. I want to rush to one other slide that we have here just a little bit, and that's really putting a buy-sell or a right of first refusal with a tenant, or if you got a landlord that really has nobody coming in after them. None of their children are related. How can we put a plan together that will allow them to have a first right to maybe purchase that operation?
That's a real worthy conversation with your landlords, isn't it? If you think about it, you've maybe farmed that land for maybe decades, and the farmer has always been comfortable with the fact that you've done a good job of taking care of the land and making sure there's no erosion and things are going all right. But if there's some kind of agreement that says that their family needs to at least give them an opportunity, a first right to maybe purchase that land, wouldn't that be great to add to their agreement? You know, as far as the rental prices and whatever they come to agreements on, it'd be great if that was on there.
All great points. You know, like Galen said, the keeping the value up, the erosion, the fertilizer, everything that's been put on that land to help build it up, increases the value, and having that conversation about that you built that up, now you have to buy it back from them. So how do you put a plan in place to make sure that happens and gives you a fair shake? All good things that we can talk about. I think we're going to open it up for questions here. Hopefully you all had some good questions about what we've been talking about.